Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Diana Fox Carney, and I'm delighted to be here to welcome you on behalf of Corporate Knights and the British High Commission to Time to Act. We're now less than a month away from the COP26 talks in Glasgow, and it really is time to act if you haven't done so already. And we've just been hearing from some of those who have done so already. So we're going to start today's session with a very short video from Nigel Topping, who's the high-level climate champion for climate action. Thank you, Chris.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nigel Topping, and I'm the United Nations High-Level Climate Action Champion. And with my colleague Gonzalo Muñez, we lead the United Nations-backed Race to Zero campaign. And so far, more than 3,000 businesses and investors have joined the Race to Zero movement. And by doing so, your business is signaling to the world, to your customers, to your investors, and to your staff, both current and future, that you are taking serious and credible climate action in line with what the science tells us is required. And the Race to Zero can provide your business international opportunities for collaboration and help to realize benefits that come with the net zero transition. Well, many Canadian businesses have already signed up to the Race to Zero, and it's heartening to see this number continually growing. And I'd like to congratulate those businesses for their bold climate commitments and decisive action. But we need more of that leadership. We need the participation of all businesses in order to tackle this crisis. So I'd like to invite you all, as members of the Canadian business community, to join the Race to Zero and to communicate to the world that your business is doing its part in creating a safe and sustainable and prosperous future. We have the technological solutions. We have the know-how. We have the innovative staff and the capital resources to do this. All we need is the will to act. We must seek pathways that limit global warming to below 1.5 degrees Celsius to avert the most dangerous impacts of climate change, which we're already seeing. We can't delay any further. Now's the time to act. Now's the time to race to zero.
That was great. So that was our introduction. The next person that I would like to introduce is Sir Chris Hohn, who's he's the founder of a hedge fund called the Children's Investment Fund, based in London, and he's also the co-founder and chair of the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, which is a really major player in climate philanthropy. So Chris is going to give us an overview of where the world is on net zero, where investors are, and where Canada is specifically. Thank you very much, Chris, and welcome to our webinar.
Thanks, Diana. So I think we've got about 10 minutes, so I'm going to run through a slide presentation quickly. Okay, great. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, over 35% of total emissions globally are due directly to companies. So without tackling corporate emissions, we cannot solve the climate change problem. Next slide. The companies face a massive challenge to decarbonize. Emissions have to be reduced by 7% per annum net of growth until 2030 to have a realistic chance of stabilizing global warming. That's the Paris Agreement. However, excluding COVID effects, emissions are in fact rising in aggregate across all companies. So why should companies act? It's very simple that climate change is a significant risk to many companies. Emissions regulation, taxation, and litigation are becoming a reality, not simply a threat. Increasing numbers of companies also face disruption from cleaner technologies and competitors. Customers, employees, and investors will and are avoiding dirty companies. All companies should be taking urgent action on climate change in their own self-interest. Regulation and taxation of emissions is coming very soon. It's all but certain there will be a global agreement for mandatory disclosure, hopefully as soon as this November COP26 conference. A carbon tax in Canada is going to raise carbon pricing incrementally over this decade. In the EU has committed in law to reduce emissions in Europe by 55% by 2030. As a result, carbon taxation of heavy industry has already begun under the emission trading scheme. The industries impacted include steel, chemicals, cement, and utilities. The market price of carbon under the scheme has increased from €5 to €60 per ton, creating billions of euros of additional cost to many European companies. This will lower profits and take money out of investors' pockets. So, so there's some more examples quickly of other real-life impacts of climate change on companies, Pacific Gas and Electric. California's forests have become a tinderbox due to drought exacerbated by climate change. In 2018, a faulty power line owned by the utility Pacific Gas and Electric started California's deadliest fire. And the company was forced to file for bankruptcy protection with $30 billion of liabilities. Another example, General Electric expanded in 2015 its exposure to coal-fired power generation equipment through the purchase of Alstom for $10 billion. But over the next 5 years, coal generation fell by 25% in the US and Europe, and renewables rose by 26%. As a result, GE had to take a $23 billion write-down in this division. Another example of the direct impact is Royal Dutch Shell. In May this year, Shell lost a landmark legal case. A Dutch court ordered them to cut their direct and indirect emissions by 45% with immediate compliance. Critically, customer emissions were included in the judgment, requiring cuts in production, dramatic cuts in production. After the judgment, the Shell CEO announced that Shell would accelerate its emission reductions in order to comply with the judgment. The case has set a broad global precedent for future environmental litigation, and a similar suit is being fought against Total. The CEO of Client Earth, an NGO employing over 150 lawyers and engaged in suing corporate polluters, threatened that they would now that corporate polluters would face a growing wave of strategic climate litigation. ExxonMobil's share price has languished for years as the company pursued growth in oil and gas output. Until this year, 5 new climate competent directors joined the board in 3 through an activist campaign. Investors have begun to reevaluate climate change risks, and the cost of debt and equity capital for dirty companies is increasing, as many investors have started to systematically incorporate corporate emissions into their underwriting process. Good companies understand it's in their self-interest to reduce their emissions. Despite all of this, most companies and asset managers are failing to take sufficient action on climate change. Only 3% of listed companies have science-based emission targets, and hardly any have a plan to reach those targets. So simply put, most companies are continue to do as little as they can get away with. Canada is a clear laggard on climate change, with the 3rd highest per capita emissions of any wealthy country. Canadian companies are lagging their global peers in setting out their climate action plans. There's a necessity for all companies to produce and implement a serious climate action plan to decarbonize their business. Disclosure and targets without a credible short and medium-term plan are wholly inadequate. This continuous talk of 2040, 2050 net zero, just pure greenwash. It's too far in the future to mean anything. The necessary components of a climate action plan are straightforward in concept. Mentioning specifically banks, Canadian banks are amongst the main funders of fossil fuels in the world. Investors are calling for banks to end dirty financing, and we believe regulators will increasingly put pressure onto banks to reduce the exposure to high emitters through forcing higher capital weightings for loans to high emitters. The Children's Investment Fund Foundation has launched a new global initiative called the Say on Climate. The purpose is to force the mandatory disclosure of both emissions and plans through submitting AGM resolutions. that force disclosure of emissions in a plan, and then an approval or disapproval vote where shareholders deem it appropriate. And ultimately, it'll be necessary, if you vote against plans, to vote against directors. Mark Carney, who is well known in Canada, Governor of Bank of Canada, supports the Say on Climate initiative as a necessary accountability mechanism on companies. A lot of companies are supporting this. CDPQ, a big investor in Canada, supports it. Most French investors are now supporting it. The Australian superannuation investors, UK local authority, and many UK investors, BlackRock and Vanguard, voted for the large majority of Say on Climate resolutions in 2021. So global investors own around 75% of Canada's high emitting listed companies, and we believe they'll start to hold them into account much more stringently. October last year, the airport group, the world's largest airport group, AENA, had the first ever AGM on a Say on Climate resolution. It succeeded with 98% support and resulted in an excellent climate action plan with 80% self-production of electricity from solar by 2026. So many leading companies have now adopted the Say on Climate. In Canada, Canadian National and Canadian Pacific have adopted it and are disclosing 5-year climate action plans, and trying to take advantage of low carbon footprint of rails, but they need to make the investments in decarbonizing their fleet, and performance is everything. Plans are just plans. It's all about performance. Shareholders have many options for activism and choose use all of them where appropriate. And but critically, philanthropy needs to help in this process in establishing, as they are now, a net zero center to fund the widespread grading of plans and plan performance. This will provide evidence and justification for shareholders to hold boards to account, and also to allocate capital towards companies that are serious about the transition. So SIF, this foundation I chair and endowed, is putting out about $200 million a year in climate grants, and finally, the role of NGOs is key in pushing through AGM resolutions. SIF has funded NGOs to file about 40 resolutions in the next year on major Canadian companies, and so to force disclosure of climate action plans in 2022. So the world is changing, and Canadian companies are going to be made to change if they're unwilling to do so by their shareholders. It's quite clear. So let me stop there, and sorry to be so rushed, but it's a short time slot. Thanks, Diana.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was great. Yeah, we are short of time today, but you've set us up really, really well for our discussion. So thank you for being with us. We're now going to move on to the panel part of our webinar. And I think what Chris has set us up for is a very action-oriented discussion. He's made it clear that there is a strong direction of travel in this space. Whatever happens at COP, we are on a trajectory, and it's a question of accelerating that trajectory. There's plenty of risks, but there's also plenty of opportunities. And with me today to discuss the risks, opportunities, and their journey in this space, specifically around joining a net zero commitment, I have 4 panelists. So we have Kerry Adler, who's founder, president, and CEO of SkyPower Global, which is a utility-scale solar PV company. We also have Teresa Jiang, who is the EVP and Chief Financial Officer of Stantec, which is a global engineering and design firm. And we have Marc-André Blanchard from the KES, who's the Executive Vice President and Head of CDPQ Global. And finally, we have Jacqueline Prehogan, who's the co-founder and chief brand officer of Open Farm, which is a specialty pet food, sustainable pet food company. So welcome to all my panelists. The way we're going to work this today is that they will all give us their introduction in the space. I will encourage you to post some questions. I will be pulling those questions out, and we will be having a moderated discussion at the end of their short presentations. So with that, I'm going to invite Kerry to open the floor, please.
Good morning or good afternoon, good evening from the United Arab Emirates, where I find myself in probably the greatest insulation regions of the world. Sky Power has been a developer of renewable energy since 2003, and we started in Canada with the view that if we could make it in Canada, then we could demonstrate to the rest of the world that you can have a renewable future. 18 years later, solar's come of age, where it is the lowest cost form of power generation. In fact, it creates more jobs, more opportunities. It enhances education. It provides critical services. And most importantly, it addresses what will be 60% of the world's population. By 2050, it's anticipated in the Middle East, North Africa, Central and Southeast Asia, that 60% of the world's population will reside here. With a population approaching 9 billion, you have to imagine that the per capita energy usage or availability of power is quite low in these developing countries. Solar provides an avenue not only to address the needs of the electricity poor and those that are aspiring to become part of society, but it also addresses the most quintessential risk to the planet, and that is the emissions of fossil fuels that are human caused, as science will obviously point out and has. I think that the greatest risk isn't from the coal plants anymore, nor is it from the cars we drive. The greatest risk is coming from the advent and the tokenization of blockchain and the growth of blockchain, which is growing unencumbered. In fact, if you were to look at the amount of energy consumed by blockchain today, and that's Bitcoin processing and the other forms of coins that are available, it consumes more energy than Argentina, Finland, the United Arab Emirates. And at the pace it's growing, if blockchain was to be considered a country, it's anticipated by 2025 it would be the largest consumer of energy. So you have a planet that's warming, the climate has changed, we're in a climate crisis. And I think it's incumbent upon us to use the skills we have to continue to advance the interests of the world as one, and to drive the need for companies to be sustainable, for individuals to take initiatives, and to create a unified approach to driving down the amount of pollution. The reality is that we are not going to be able to stop climate change, but we have to do our best by financing renewable energy projects. We have to seek financing of innovation and technology that's going to lengthen the runway and provide the opportunity for our children, our grandchildren, to have a brighter future as we've had. And I believe it's incumbent upon each and every one of us to communicate that message and not ask, but insist that leaders and citizens, business owners and business titans alike, need to take the initiative and need to do it not because they're emitting too much carbon, not because they have a small carbon footprint or a large carbon footprint. They need to do it because it's the right thing. And we should encourage our government and those funds that are owned by the government around the world, not just in Canada, to direct their funds towards sustainable investments, because that is going to be the key. Unlocking the capital that allows for and advances solar energy is the only thing that's holding back companies like Sky Power from going from 5 gigawatts to 20 gigawatts to 50. We're not alone. There is not enough capital been deployed. Not enough capital to meet the needs of these growing energy hungry consumers who continue to buy electronics and continue to want to be educated. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's upon us to really push. We cannot accept anymore that there is a strategy, because a strategy without execution is nothing but an empty business plan. We need to insist that we can do better, and we need to insist that everybody contributes their fair share to a future that is bright and provides an opportunity for all humanity to live in a cleaner and more prosperous environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kerry. That was a great introduction. Next, we're going to move to Teresa Jiang. Teresa, could you talk about your journey, please, at Stantec?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So first, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this discussion today. I'm the CFO at Stantec, and we are an architectural, engineering, environmental services company with 22,000 employees around the world. So as CFO, I oversee our global financial operations, including our public disclosures, and I also chair Stantec's executive ESG committee. So I get to sit squarely where our financial performance intersects with our ESG performance. I'm personally very committed to sustainability and a big proponent of sustainable behavior in our operations. Taking steps toward greater sustainability makes good business sense. It helps with recruiting and retaining our highly skilled and talented staff. And it's a growing area of focus for our investors as they pivot toward impact investing. We've seen a direct correlation between our share price and recognition of our positive ESG performance. So Stantec's been focused on reducing emissions in our operations for many years. And a little while ago, we began looking at setting a science-based target. This was consistent with our corporate values, and it felt like a natural progression. We considered taking the more ambitious 1.5 degree C path, and it took our leadership team a number of discussions to get comfortable with making a bold commitment like that. To gain executive support, we developed a roadmap, and it wasn't fully developed down to the last detail as to how we were going to achieve this commitment, but it certainly helped us to identify impactful actions that we could take, key milestones along the way, and a reasonable timeline. So this did allow us to gain full buy-in from our executive team and from our board. In fact, we realized as we got going that there actually was more that we could do. So we decided to set a net zero commitment by 2030 with an interim step of carbon neutrality. We'll be following the Science Based Target Initiative's definition for net zero once it's released later this month. And just this week, we were thrilled to learn that the Science Based Target Initiative has validated our emissions reduction targets and confirmed that they're in line with the 1.5 degree C trajectory. Stantec sits in a unique place because we're able to make a positive impact on sustainability both within our operations and through our project work for our clients. As an architectural, engineering, and consulting firm, we're leaders in providing sustainable advisory and design services. So it's through our work that our clients can have a positive impact on the world as we help them design net zero buildings, renewable energy facilities, and so on to achieve their sustainability ambitions. We've recently begun tracking our ESG-related revenue using the SDGs as our mechanism to track progress. And we're really proud that in 2020, approximately half of our revenues had a direct SDG connection. But we're challenging ourselves to do more, and we're excited to encourage everyone on this call to do more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresa. That's a great journey, and there's lots of questions I have for you afterwards. But we're going to move on now to Jacqueline Prehogan. Jacqueline, tell us about your journey.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me today. So OpenFirm is a high-growth CPG company in the pet space. And since day one, we've always been mission-driven. So we really started out with a vision to improve animal welfare and transparency in supply chain. And we really just wanted to provide, a more environmentally friendly option to pet parents. So we've been very focused since day one on, reducing our footprint. But really our head was more in the world of, waste reduction and actually ocean health. So in the last couple of years, we really wanted to take a big swing at this. And we knew that GHG reduction had to be very central to that strategy. So today I'll be sharing our perspective on sort of the process that we went through to, get to that science-based target commitment and start off that race to zero and, where we are today, which is really in the early stages of that journey. So I guess the first question is, what prompted us to sign up for this? I can tell you that historically our industry, the pet industry, is quite slow to react. And I think that really shows in the lack of action on climate issues that we're seeing overall. So we saw, an opportunity not only to obviously, create change with our own business, but hopefully to step in and lead and really influence our industry and sort of fill that role. And, in addition to that, this is something that we felt that our team would be really engaged in, really excited about. Our team is so passionate about our mission to begin with. That's why a lot of people come to work with us. And so, that's something that we thought everyone would just fully jump into, which they have. That being said, this hasn't come without, its challenges and roadblocks, even just to get to that starting point. I think for us, and I've heard this from a lot of other companies, the first thing that we realized is that we lack the internal knowledge around climate. It's very technical. And even though our company has always been very progressive on environment, there was a lot that we didn't know and that we're still figuring out today. For example, we're an extremely high growth company. So somehow, we have to reduce our emissions while we still expand our operations dramatically. So, of course, that was a huge unknown. How do we do that? What structural changes are we going to need to make to deliver on this? What investment in our team are we going to need to, credibly take this on? But at the end of the day, we had the will to do it. We were motivated. We were excited for this challenge. And I, personally think that is the number one most important thing, because that's going to allow you to push through any challenge. So in terms of getting started, the first thing that we did was we found experts to help us. We brought in an external consulting firm to help us measure our baseline GHG and really to educate us on the types of targets that we could set. In addition to that, again, we really realized we needed that internal competency. So started to invest in our internal team and really bring this expertise in-house. And I think that ultimately, the more we learned, we really understood that we had to align ourselves with, a globally recognized commitment for our reduction targets. So we became the first company in the independent pet space and only the 12th company in Canada to make a science-based target commitment, which was also, of course, the first step in our Race to Zero commitment. So that being said, it's obviously a journey. We wanted to have, an immediate impact. So we also employed an offset strategy, offsetting our scope 1 and 2 emissions right away, which is something that we're committed to continue doing as we work towards those longer term reduction goals as well. So where we are today is we're, fleshing out our strategy for science-based targets, and then really assessing how we can keep advancing this journey to net zero over a longer time horizon. So yeah, that's us in a nutshell, and look forward to discussing with you all today.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. I think that's a really practical description of what it takes to get on the trajectory to net zero. So our final panelist today, Marc-Andre, he's from CDPQ. It's not a member of Race to Zero per se, it's a co-founder. CDPQ is a co-founder of the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, which was founded a couple of years ago. Welcome, Marc-Andre.
Thank you very much, Diana, and it's so nice to be sharing this panel with Carrie, Teresa, and Jacqueline, and privileged to be addressing all of you today. The CDPQ is has been looking at it in a very innovative way. We were the first asset owners, asset managers, certainly in North America at the time in 2017, to come out with really a climate strategy, and we published our first strategy then in 2017. It went very far. I mean, I can tell you, it went as far as we set very ambitious targets then, and actually we integrated at the time it was tied to our compensation. So to everybody's compensation at CDPQ, it's related to our carbon footprint and all of our objective of our climate strategy. So we've made a lot of decisions in the last 3-4 years that actually have enabled us to surpass our target. We doubled the value of our green assets. We reduced the carbon intensity of our portfolio by 38% in 3 years. And last week, you must have heard about our announcement. We set our new ambition for, and we're very proud of that. And so we're targeting now 54 billion in green assets by 2025. That's in a few years from now. So we will therefore triple the value of our portfolio of low carbon assets by 2025 compared with 2017. We invest to increase the supply of clean energy as well as sustainable transportation and real estate around the world, and many other assets that we believe contribute to the transition. We're raising the carbon reduction targets for our portfolio to 60% in 2030 compared to what we had in 2017. That's very ambitious, and so. And now, you know, for us, it's yes, net zero, net carbon footprint reduction. It's a lot about also investing now in the transition, you know. So we have announced last week that we'll be creating a $10 billion transition envelope to invest in decarbonizing major companies. So this will be focusing on areas that are essentials to the transition of the whole economy, and you know, are also in some cases, let's admit that there are some of parts of it are the heaviest emitters and need to transit. And so we will be investing in raw materials like meat, metals, and cement, and transportation and agriculture. And with a view that really with companies that are very well thought of, that are leading the way for decarbonizing, that have solid plans of decarbonization and measurable objectives with a clear timetable. And so this is we believe it's an unavoidable path or step on the road to net zero. And also we've announced as a fourth pillar of our policy or our ambition that we will complete our exit from oil production by the end of 2022. And we now have assets. We have $400 billion of assets under management at CDPQ, and our oil production assets now represents 1% of our total assets. So we'll complete the exit by 2022. And we'll continue to, to exclude investments in new oil pipelines. And for us, it's clear we want to avoid contributing to the growth of the global oil supply. And but we want to really remain open to investments in transition platforms and projects. And there's a big role for capital in this. And for us, it's not about, you're talking about risk, Diana, in your introduction, and I agree with that, what you said, but it's also, there's a big risk in not doing anything. This is like, we all have to realize that and come to grip with that. And we really need to better align capital with sustainable development. And it's not, for us, it's not just the right thing, it's obviously the right thing to do for the society, but it's also the right thing to do for our depositors, for the returns of our investments that we're seeking, for the economic development of Quebec that we're also have a role in. And it's also a way of de-risking ourselves. Let's be clear, there's a huge opportunity for investors like us. And that's how we look at it. And we want to be a leader. And I think our ambitions that we've laid out last week is confirming that we're actually a very important leader in the world on this issue. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That's fascinating. It really teed up the question that I wanted to address to the other panelists, which is, what was the primary motivating factor? There is this idea of kind of doing the right thing by society, that there's a risk of not doing it, and there's also opportunities of moving in the direction which we've heard about so eloquently. Did you have those discussions internally, and which kind of theme predominated? I'll ask you first, Teresa.
Yes, it is interesting because as I mentioned in my remarks, sustainability is something that Stantec has done for many years, particularly in support of our clients. But signing up for the 1.5 degree climate target was not something that happened overnight. For us, I think what was a key catalyst was actually having someone internally who was deeply passionate about sustainability and absolutely relentless in continually challenging us to raise the bar on what we could achieve, because for a long time we felt like we were kind of doing okay in this space. And we were also very cautious in that we didn't want to just jump on the sustainability bandwagon without really knowing what our plan was or how we were going to achieve it. And so, we gave a lot of thought and did a lot of research around what did this mean and what could we do, where could we be most impactful in this space. And it did take us some time, but we ultimately got there. And again, as I mentioned, we found that once we got going, we could be more ambitious than we initially thought we wanted to be. And so all of that momentum started to build and turn into discrete actions that we could take. And I did want to mention as well, just on this topic of setting targets, that it's important to know we don't have it all figured out. I think Jacqueline said the same thing. We've got a plan for carbon neutrality, which is very much light green, but we have plans toward that to get to net zero. We don't have it all figured out yet, but I'm a firm believer that when you set goals or objectives, there has to be a degree of aspiration in there. There has to be some element that stretches you beyond what you currently think you're capable of, and that's what will really drive innovation to those big solutions. And so it is a journey, but it's been one that we've been really pleased with the progress we've made to date.
Jacqueline, I'll just go to you. And you mentioned one of the challenges that sometimes comes up when people look at the science-based targets. And just for those who are listening, the race to net zero does require a stable set of both commitments and plans and disclosure around getting to net zero. And the Science-Based Target Initiative is one of, and perhaps the sort of leader in the space of establishing and verifying these plans. So both Stantec and Open Farm have gone that route. One of the challenges with the science-based target is just the point you made, which is that you have to do absolute reductions, notwithstanding the possible increases in market size or market share that you're hoping for. Did that kind of perturb people internally? Because that's that raises the bar considerably.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, our organization, like I said, mission driven since day one, entered a really busy category and, had to differentiate ourselves. And we did that by setting, big goals. And like Teresa said, being really ambitious, and we're really huge believers in that. Every obstacle leads to an opportunity. And to be honest with you, again, I don't know that we fully understood at first. Of course, before we made the commitment, when we were sort of going through all the different options and, came to sort of science-based targets, and it's like, what are you're saying from our baseline 2020, we need to reduce, we need to go like this with our emissions, but our growth is going like this. Like, how are we going to do that? And so I think that there's no doubt that that is a daunting prospect, and it's going to require us to make very significant changes in our business, and invest in a lot and really change our trajectory of how we make our products, how we deliver our products. And that's a big deal. But I think because of the culture and the nature of our organization, and again, the passion that our employees have for what we do, and everything we've done in animal welfare with transparency and really sort of changed our industry, there was so much energy behind that challenge. And that being said, like you said, it takes a tremendous amount of planning and strategy, action plans that we are still working through right now. And it's not a one and done, it's an ongoing journey that we're going to be on. So, I think that it is daunting for even a stable growth company. One like us, it's a pretty colossal challenge. But like I said, we have the will, the passion, the team to get there, and it's also very tied into our brand and what we deliver to pet parents. So for us, I think we view this as an opportunity, and we're all in.
That's fantastic. Again, I really like your sort of practical approach. You're all in. You're figuring out as you go, which is, as Teresa said, there has to be something aspirational and inspirational in this. Marc-Andre, can we come back to you and talk a little bit more about the financial sector? Obviously, globally, the financial sector has really been responsible for quite a lot of the action. I think Chris described that well, that there's NGOs and litigators that are also pushing, but demand by the financial sector and change in the cost of capital as well is really shifting behaviors. Can I just ask you to explain a little bit more about how you, as a asset owner and manager, are going to track your progress to net zero, how that is done with respect to your investments and your own emissions?
Well, that is there are a few things in there like to unpack. We believe in targets, so they give a direction and ensure that we monitor our pace and results. But we believe that the setting the North Star is sometimes the easy part. So it is the starting point. It's not the end. And so we, in our own experience, where we thought, like, we believe that short-term targets are very important because like they guide your action in the short, medium term, and it makes you do things. Because as I said, it's very nice to put these net zero goals in place, but like if you don't act, there's no result. And so I'll tell you the fact that we set ourselves some very ambitious targets in 2017 really has something to do that when you look at it now, we are a top 3 investors in the world in the renewables sector. We're part of the top 10 investors in the world in infrastructure, and we're gonna, in the next 4 years, we're gonna take our portfolio of infrastructure from $30 billion to $60 billion, and it is directly related to our ambition that we've set for ourselves on climate. And I'll spare you the details, and I'm because first of all, because I'm not the right person on how we track it for every investment and how we go and how deep we go. I can tell you we take it incredibly seriously at CDPQ. There's a large team of people that is involved in the measurement, in the getting the data, and if you look at our reports, we're incredibly transparent on our carbon footprint and how we measure it and all of that. But for me, the main thing is about the investment side, and it's about having an impact. That led us, this ambition on climate is not foreign to the fact that we became, imagine for a pension fund, we are now, we have designed, we're now building, we will operate and own 68 or 69 kilometers of light rail around Montreal. This is never seen before. Like this is a major shift of the allocation of capital by an institutional investor. But that is linked to our climate ambition. For us, it was important because that was a very big project that could contribute massively to the reduction of emissions in the metropolitan area of Montreal. We thought it should be made, and we went forward, and that is linked to our climate ambition. and to, and so we're going to do that, but that's completely new for a role for an institutional investors to do such a green field and to actually do, and that's what the path to net zero will require all of us, whether you're open farm or whether you're CDPQ or whether you're Stantec, to look at the world differently, look at partnerships differently. It's the fact that you would have a pension fund or an institutional investors like CDPQ doing what we're doing for the RAM in Montreal is innovative. The partnership we have with the government of Quebec, with the Infrastructure Bank of Canada, with the communities the train goes through, with the supply of hydroelectricity, of clean energy, and this with Hydro-Quebec, this requires a completely different way of thinking by all of us, and to enter into a partnership that is very unique. So we will have to do many of these unique partnerships in the years to come if we want to actually get to the net zero objective that we've all, and it's all, for now, for investors and asset owners, asset managers, it's all about investment from now on, and we need to make sure that we invest in the transition, and as we are doing with our own envelope, that we believe it's also important to be part of the decarbonization.
As a manager of pension plans, there is a unique opportunity to connect people's lifestyles and provide them with the opportunity, and that that's what hasn't been done in the past, and so it's great to hear you are doing that. I want to talk a little bit about really how companies like yours can inspire others. It strikes me that there's two ways to do it. One is what we're trying to do now, which is present leadership, kind of de-risk it in the sense that we can tell people that it's possible. And the other is working with suppliers and users of your products. And this is, again, we're back to the scope 3 question. For many companies, their scope 1 and 2 emissions, which are their own emissions and those from purchased energy, are relatively small in comparison with the emissions created by their products and by those who supply them inputs. And that is at its extreme, really, in the oil and gas industry, where we haven't seen a rush into reductions of scope 3 emissions. We've seen lots of commitments around scope 1 and 2, but not scope 3. Tell us a little bit about perhaps how you can use these discussions with suppliers, with your supply chain, with your customers, both to increase your standing. And we have a question in about supply-led rather than demand-led. I presume this creates a greater coherence with your customers as well, but how you can help influence your suppliers through your actions. And I'll go to Jacqueline first, and then Teresa. I see we've got Kerry back, so we'll come to him.
Yeah, look, I think number one is being important to your suppliers. So, if you are important to your suppliers, obviously they are going to be more willing to make changes for you. And I can tell you, we've already done this. We were the first company in our industry to go 100% with 100% certified meat for animal welfare. And that requires a lot more work on our suppliers. They have to go through audits from like our certifiers. And we actually did that when we were really small. And as we grew and we grew that credibility, got easier and easier for us to find partners that wanted to work for us. And what ended up happening is, as this grew and this became more and more something that consumer wanted, it actually became a selling point for our suppliers. Like, hey, we do this and we work with Open Farm, and then other people want to work for them. So, the point's been made on this discussion a lot that it's good for businesses, because this is where the country is going. This is where the consumer is going. And the whole supply chain is going to need to adapt to offer that solution. And so I think that then ties to the customer question, which is, customers want to make a difference, but they don't know how. And they want to look for an easy and accessible way to do that. And if you can do that through what you offer them, and you can package it in a way where they understand it, it's transparent, and they can vote with their dollars by, purchasing a lower impact product, then you're doing it right there. And by generating that demand, you go all the way back to your manufacturers, to your ingredient suppliers, with so much more leverage and credibility in having those discussions, and really them being right there with you, motivated to make those types of changes. And that's really probably the biggest tool that we have in our toolbox: growing, being successful, and finding really amazing partners that want to do the same and deliver that value to our customers, to pet parents.
No, I think that's truly inspirational. So Teresa, you mentioned at the start that you have great influence over those that you work with. How has that played out for you?
It's really, it is where we can have the biggest impact, because as a professional services company, operationally, we're very proud of the part that we are doing, but we're not large emitters in the work that we do. And so the impact that we can have is around helping clients as they try to figure out what can they be doing to reduce their footprint. Maybe they are renovating or refurbishing their offices, and we can help them to design it so that it is more efficient in its heating and cooling only when there's an occupant in the room. Maybe they're building something new, and we can introduce to them the concept of net zero buildings and how it can be net zero over the course of a year with its energy use. Or with our manufacturers who are large users of water. So we can help them in designing processes that use reclaimed water or net zero liquid discharge. I love talking about that. It makes me sound really smart as an accountant. But there are so many ways that companies can look to take, whether they are small steps or very ambitious steps in how to address their carbon footprint. And we are so proud to be able to have the expertise to help deliver that. Marc-Andre referenced the REM project in Montreal, and we're very proud to be a part of that project. So helping to design light rail and mass transit systems that have a low carbon footprint, and also are designed from an inclusion and diversity standpoint that make it accessible for all of society. So these are all the things that we get to do. It's very, very impactful, and it really energizes our employees to know that we can play such a big role in this endeavor.
That's great. It's part of your, increasing, I imagine, part of your comparative advantage. Carrie, thank you for coming back. We lost you for a bit. Very briefly, I want to add two questions to you. One is around how one manages, when you deal in so many different geographies, whether calculating net zero and thinking about this becomes more complex, which I imagine it does. And the second one, which I'll put on the table at the same time, is this question of how you seek to minimize these scope 3 emissions when, as a supplier of clean energy, you're underwriting other people's or reducing other people's scope 2 emissions, but you also have to contend with issues around supply chain, minerals, etc. in your product. So can you give me any thoughts on either of those issues?
Sure. First of all, I wanted to say really happy to, Marc-Andre Lachard, really happy to hear the commitment to the case of the Depot as a Quebecer. This is amazing to see, funds that are planned to be deployed into advancing the renewable agenda. And Teresa, you guys are amazing what you're doing. I mean, as well as Jacqueline. I mean, this has been an amazing opportunity for me to hear from other fellow Canadians. Look, there is no such thing as net zero. I think you have to start there. There's a consequence for every action, right? So building a solar panel cannot be net zero, just like building an electric vehicle. There was a question I saw that came on the Q&A. I apologize, I lost video and then audio, but I did have a chance to read it. There is no lithium in a solar panel. Okay? There is no cobalt in a solar panel. Those belong in batteries, which invariably will become the next stage. Once you have solar, then you have to take solar to baseload power, which in the next 5 years will become cost effective. However, in a solar panel, there is silicon, which is natural. There is copper, which is what makes the panel work. And there is electronics, there's aluminum, there's glass, and making glass does take energy. But if you look at a solar panel over its life, which is 35 years minimum, that's the warranted life, versus a kilowatt of energy generated through fossil fuel, and you look at the emissions on a kilowatt by kilowatt basis, and they're dramatically different. But it would be a falsehood to say that it's net zero, because it's not. I think the most important thing is to address what is the best way to reduce the emissions going into the manufacturing process. And that is something we look at very carefully, as we do the labor being used, as most solar panels today come from China. And there are some Chinese manufacturers that don't believe in human rights the way we do. So we're very sensitive to that. We're also very sensitive to the way that they develop these panels to ensure that the quality is there and to ensure that the life of the panel equates to the original design specifications. Look, the greatest challenge today of taking solar energy, which is the lowest cost of energy, and bringing it to base load power, is in fact going to cause another unintended consequence, because no battery in the world works without cobalt, even in your cell phone. 60+% of the cobalt in the world sits in the DRC. To take that out of the ground, you're going to consume energy. So we have an opportunity now, because cobalt is becoming more critical to the supply chain of providing sustainable energy. So we have the opportunity now to work with, and we're very active in the DRC. We have an agreement to build 1,000 megawatts with that government. And they have a real incredible vision of how they're going to use that energy to pull more of that cobalt out of the ground in a sustainable manner in order to help power the rest of the world sustainably.
That is, I hadn't heard that. That's a great story. So it's a sort of circular benefit. It's a virtuous circle upwards if you do it that way. Guys, we're out of time. We could go on for a long time, I know, and it's been really interesting and quite practical, which is what I enjoy. I'm going to conclude by, first of all, thanking you all for sharing your journeys, and passing over to Toby Heaps, who, as you know, is the CEO of Corporate Knights, and he will be closing out for us.
Thanks, Diana, and thanks everyone for joining us today for the conversation. Really appreciate working together in partnership with the British High Commission to convene this important conversation today, and all the wisdom from our panelists. I was just summing things up in a nutshell. We heard from Chris Hohn, who's one of the most feared hedge fund managers on the planet, that the investors are coming for you, and if you don't have a climate plan, your board may be fired. So the investors are coming. We heard from Carrie, the cost-effective technology for clean energy to satisfy the demand for what the clean energy that people want. It's there on the shelf. The capital is lacking. We heard from Teresa, who heads the finance function for one of the most sustainable infrastructure companies on the planet, which currently has 49% of their business aligned with sustainable development goals. We heard that we can all do more. We heard from Jacqueline that it's okay to go all in before you have everything figured out. In fact, it's actually necessary to go all in, because we're not going to figure everything out until it's too late. We heard from Marc-Andre in his perch at the second largest pension fund in Canada, $400 billion, that if you go looking for these low carbon investment opportunities, you will find them, and you will find them in greater abundance than you first expected. In CDPQ's case, they were expecting to increase the low carbon investments by 50% over 4 years. They doubled them, and now they have a more ambitious target. They've raised the bar. We can take stock of all of this, and I think the takeaways from all of this are quite clear. Now is the time to take the plunge in the race to zero, and if we pour money on solutions, we will drive the future that we want. And what we do today will have severe and potentially great beneficial consequences for the future of life on this planet. And so it matters a lot. What that means is we have to make 100%, we have to drive as quickly as possible to get 100% of all new investments, CapEx, OpEx, going into investments that are aligned with the low carbon economy, not in 2030, but today. And I truly believe, because if you look at the solutions and how fast they're growing, I truly believe that if we do this, we will make magic happen, and we will create a future that is worth leaving for our children. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to tracking your progress.
you